like they like me. So I'm just going to set up what a contemporary treatment of this looks like. Okay. So I'm not going to motivate too much, but you should. Sure.
Vikram, Michael, now. You can hear me. Okay, you can just continue.
Yeah. So I'm just going to set it up, and as we go along, you can we try to motivate parts of things. This reminds me at my gym, there is this, the exercise person wears this and says, jump, jump, jump like this, jump to the left, jump to the right. So, feel like my exercise teacher. Okay, so, okay, so you have a pronoun which we will just treat like a DP. So one common idea that people have adopted is to split transitivity from the verb root itself. So like by itself, the root like basically just represents a relationship with the object. Maybe can you guys see from that angle? Maybe it might be better.
I'm just asking on the screen.
Oh, I see. So this will be broadcast there. Oh, that's nice. Yeah. Okay. So then you have this special guy, little v, and then you have another dp, they. Okay. So what's happening here is that we are splitting up the verb like into two parts. We have one part which is taking the object, and another part which is introducing what you could call the agent, though in the case of the verb like, it's weird to call it agent, but it's the external argument. Okay, and this is something where once we look at data from many Indo-Aryan languages, we will find an argument that at least with certain predicates in Indo-Aryan languages, you see evidence for something like this. So I will make the claim right now that to a certain extent we can argue that the word kar in Hindi is little v. Basically, not always. I'm not making that claim in general, but Hindi Urdu has many contrasts of the following sort. Ram ne kamra saaf kiya, kamra saaf ho gaya. Okay, so if you imagine that saaf is giving you some portion here, then the hona or the karna is then telling you whether there is an agent or whether there is no agent. Okay, so take the example, take saaf is giving you a state with respect to the kamra, and then what you're getting is, now you have to verbalize the structure. So you can put a ho. If you put in ho is going to be like b, it will not give you an external argument. Kar will give you an external argument. Okay. So anyway, but in English, you almost never see this guy. And the idea is that at the end of the day, these two guys end up combining and you get one piece. Okay. But conceptually, there are two things going on here. Okay. So far. So now this is just the argument structure part. Nothing special has happened here. Now, first we can try and do some chase here. So one thought that people have had is that transitive little v is the source of accusative case. So it assigns accusative case to this, and that's why you get me here, you don't get I, right? So you don't say they like I, you say they like me, because this is in the object position, and there is this little v is the locus for case. Okay, so one idea, important idea here is that there is something about transitive little v that assigns accusative case. Okay, so it's this. Now we go up the tree. So I'm going to, okay, so let's say this is present. Okay, now two things happen here. One is that finite t itself licenses case. Okay, so now this licenses nominative to this. Okay, but in return it picks up the agreement features of this guy, which there are many features here. So you could say, well, there's third person, and then there is plural. English does not really do too much with gender. For the most part, at least in the agreement system, you don't really see much gender. So what you end up getting is 3PL here. Okay. One more thing happens. English has an EPP requirement, or basically a requirement that subjects have to appear at a certain point in the tree. So what is often assumed is that the subject gets pulled here, and you get they in this position. It's not pronounced in this position anymore. Okay, now one more thing has to happen. We don't really say in English, well, in this I've not chosen the best example, but you don't pronounce the agreement separate from the verb. You don't say they, third plural, like me. This guy combines, and this is sort of a separate process that happens. This whole thing seems to lower onto this verb, and you get the pronunciation down there. Okay, so in this case it's they like me, but if the subject had been he, you would have gotten he likes me. Okay, so the thought would be that this, in that case, this would have, if it would have been he, then you would have had third singular, which in English is realized by and that's would lower onto like, and you would get he likes me. Okay. So a bunch of things have happened in this thing, so let's step back and stare at them. So we started building structure bottom up. That's one way of doing it. Maybe there are other ways also, but that's how we will try to do structure building. So you have one idea that we will be playing with is that there is a sense in which the direct object has a relationship with the verb which is somewhat special. Or in fact, actually it's not just there's the direct object, and then there is the external argument which comes in later. Right. So in English, this seems relatively straightforward because of where the verb appears. Okay, so English is a verb medial language, and that verb medial, what that verb medial stuff does is that you get subjects on the left side and everything else below. This is very convenient, but if you are working on most South Asian languages where the verb comes at the end, things become much trickier. Okay, so this is going to be one of our challenges, just trying to determine hierarchy. Also, in this case, so in the case at hand, so where is the, yeah, here. Yes. So in this case, it wasn't completely obvious why I needed to move the they. But let's say you had something like, they will like me. Okay. Now in this case, under T, we would have had will, right? And what you can see is that if you do not move the subject to spec TP, to the specifier position of TP, then the order that you would end up with is, will they like me, right? And will they like me is not how you say that's how you would ask the question. That's not how you would say, convey the declarative, right? So you can sort of see that you need to do this. An important question, and I think an unresolved question, as far as I can tell, for most Indo-Aryan languages is, does this movement to the specifier position of T, does this movement take place? Or actually, maybe a different way of asking this is, maybe it takes place, but does it have to take place? Does it obligatorily take place, right? In English, there's no way out. Once you say that will or these inflectional elements are in T, of course it takes place, otherwise you would not get the word order right. How would you know for a word final language whether something has moved to the specifier of T or not? Okay, I'm not actually going to give you answers for this because I don't know myself, but what I want is to sort of ask us to think about this, because very often people will say, yes, of course, it takes place because it takes place in English. That is a very bad argument. Okay, and we should all appreciate that as such. Just because it takes just because in one language you find movement to a certain position doesn't mean you have to find movement to that same position in another language also, because it would be okay if we knew in English why movement takes place to that position. But the fact is that even for English, we have to basically write down movement takes place to this position. We don't know why it takes place to that position. So it's completely worth asking very carefully, do we really need that movement when we are looking at things here? Okay. So here is, so English is a language, as I said, where there is not a whole lot of case. So there is this nominative up there and there is this accusative down there. Okay. But now we could start thinking about what parts of this we are going to keep, okay? Or at least what I want to do is I want to set up kind of a toy system that we can then react to, okay? So that toy system is a system which will allow, which will make certain assumptions. Those are not assumptions that should not be challenged. They should be challenged, but those assumptions will, what we can do is whenever we get a new piece of data, we can ask ourselves, how does that new piece of data fit with the rest of the system? Okay. So let's, so this movement to spec TP, this portion, I'm not going to keep, I'm going to assume that maybe you can move there. In fact, there will be certain cases. So first of all, let's start redoing this tree and changing the directionality of the heads. This is the structure, this is our baseline structure, okay. Everything we'll assume something like this, and then we'll see whether we want to change things. So we are keeping one very important thing from the structure that I started off with. We've changed many things, we've changed directionality, movement to spec TP. But one very important thing that we are keeping here is that the subject is higher than the object, okay? And it's important to talk about higher in terms of that there is a domain which does not include the external. So I'll use a number of terms which are not all the same, but I use the term external argument. Sometimes I'll use the term subject. Sometimes I'll use the term agent. These will all be different notions. But let's first let me first talk about subject very briefly. So subject, subject is a very interesting notion because it's a notion that you find in pretty much every description of English. When you're talking about English, it's very useful to think about sentences as consisting of a subject and a predicate. There are some sentences where it's not so easy to think about it like that, but you can still, so existential sentences, right? There is a cat in the room. There it's a bit weird. The subject you have to say is there, and the predicate is a cat in the room, be a cat in the room. What kind of a predicate is be a cat in the room? But for the most part, right, it's relatively easy to say John knows English. So John is the subject, knows English is the predicate. When you leave English, and especially when you look at South Asian languages, the notion subject becomes very difficult. Okay, so because in English the notion subject is a notion where lots and lots of things come together. Okay, so the subject is typically the first thing in the sentence. It is almost always nominative. It is also the thing that controls agreement. It is also the thing, if you have a reflexive, it's also the thing that binds reflexives. So all of these things come together in one nice, beautiful package. And so it really is a notion that you need. You need the notion of subject to talk about English syntax in a sensible way, even if contemporary generative grammar does not really have subject as a primitive. But still, subject is replaced by a structural notion like specifier of TP or something like that, but it is a basic notion. However, when you come to South Asian languages, it is very tricky. In fact, so I find it instructing. I mean, I really know very little Sanskrit grammar, but like it's interesting that Panini, who was a very smart guy and came up with all kinds of interesting ideas, does not have the notion of subject. There is, throughout that his work, he never talks about subjects. And there's a reason, because I think if you look at if you start from South Asian languages, you would not need to come up with the notion of subject, because when you look, there is a very nice dissertation by Tara Mohanan who tries to come up. She comes to this from a tradition of lexical functional grammar where subjects are a big deal. Everything is about subjects. So if you start from such a system, right, and you come to Hindi, then it's a bit annoying because there is no unified notion of subject. So she does what she can do within that framework, which is she says, okay, here is what it means to be a subject in Hindi, and then she writes the list down. And when you read the list, you see it works. It's a very sensible list. But then you have to ask yourself, why this list? Why not some other list? Right? In English, it's very clear. All of these things go together. In Hindi, it looks like here are four or five features. Sometimes they go together. So, for example, you might be nominative, you might control agreement, you might bind, but they don't always go together. Okay. So that's why we will continue to ask what it means to be a subject. We will often either, like in some cases, right, John saw Mary, it'll be clear, right, because these sentences are straightforwardly like the sentences that we start off with in English. But when you have something like, in English, take something like, John has 2 horses, right? In Hindi, you would say something like, near John ke paas 2 ghode hain, right? Literally, near John are 2 horses. Now, it's very strange to think of why should in this sentence, what is the subject? Is it, are the horses the subject, or is it near John? Near John is a locative. Why would a locative be a subject, right? It's like saying the horses are near John, and then you're saying near John is, okay? And yet we have this intuition, right, that to the extent that if somebody said, decide now once and for all, what is the subject in John ke paas 2 ghode hain, you would say John, right? But this is not a scientific judgment. This is just some kind of folk judgment. So what exactly is going on? However, but look at this. John के पास दो घोड़े हैं, not John के पास दो घोड़े हैं, right? So दो घोड़े controls agreement on the auxiliary, right? That tells you that there is, by one definition of subject, दो घोड़े is the subject, but by another intuition of subject, John के पास. So these are all. That's why the notion of subject, we should be very skeptical about it. You shouldn't, especially in the cases where it will matter. There will be easy cases, like, so it is true that if in Hindi anything gets nay, then it is going to look like a bona fide subject, right? So that's not, even though that the nay guy will never itself control agreement, but right. So, but nevertheless, one other notion which I find actually quite useful is to ask ourselves, is to think about the notion of internal and external. Okay, so what parts of the sentence are affected by changing things in this zone, and what parts of the sentence are not affected? Okay, and I think this gives this leads to some kind of interesting cuts. Okay, so take something like Mary ने सीता को देखा. Okay, so in this case, if you so let me write that down. So in this, let's we can put more stuff here. देखा था. So this portion, okay, just to accommodate some of these things, let me put one more projection in here. Something for aspect, so that we get an aspectual phrase, and then TP, okay. So in this case, here I would have, let's say this would be, the asp would be perfective, which would give us something like ya, and then here you would have the tha. Okay, and yeah, so this is just the, and here you have, okay. So one thing we can see is, if you mess around with what goes in this portion of the tree, this case changes. Okay, so for example, if I change ya to ta, then this becomes nominative, right? You cannot say Meera ne Sita ko dekhta tha. That is completely ungrammatical, right? So in that case, you would need to get Meera ne Sita ko, no, not Meera, then you would have to get Meera Sita ko dekhti thi, right? So suddenly something changes quite dramatically. So one idea is that this portion, this is one domain, this is the external domain, and this is the lower domain. Okay, this is not to say this is actually one domain, and then this is going to be the other domain. Because in this, what you can see is that no matter what you do up here, in this portion of the tree, it's not going to affect case marking here, right? So we can try, what all can we do to make, okay? So let me just list the morphologies that we have. So this is the one that's being projected. So what all does?
You can move. It will move.
Oh, it will move. Ah. Okay, so let's see. What? Let's just make our. Let's make what's the full list of endings that they can take in Hindi. Okay, so there is the perfective, which we have there. You have the imperfective habitual. Okay, so this is the ya ending. This is the ta ending. We have the subjunctive, which is the, let's call it the a ending. So मैं चाहता हूँ कि तुम फल खाओ, मैं चाहता हूँ कि वो फल खाए, right? So I should also put a ye. This y is not really there. This is there for phonological reasons, but so you have these. What else can we do? We can do the gerund / infinitive, which is the na ending. Is there anything else? Yes. So the future, I will put combined here. So there is good reason to think that the future is complex in Hindi, that the future contains the subjunctive. So there's the subjunctive, and then you take the subjunctive and then you put something more on top of that. And it is reported, like in older grammars of Hindi, like I think by Kellogg, that there was a time when these two things were not together. And you can sort of see this in Hindi orthography puts these together, but Urdu orthography would put these two things separately. And that at one point it's noted that you could, so this is completely impossible in contemporary Hindi, but at some point, khaega, you could, so khae plus ga, you could put something like a he in between. Khae, he, ga. I mean, I can't even generate it, but at one point these two things were, you can sort of see very clearly. I mean, we'll look at this, we'll play around with all of these guys a little bit. But what is interesting is that the inflection of the subjunctive and this part of the future is the same. And then this inflection is like it's a participial inflection, and we'll talk about that. Okay, and so you have the gerund, and I don't know, maybe there is a little bit more, but this is about it, I think. There is also the imperative is also sort of here. Yeah, the infinitive I'm grouping here. Okay, very good. So causatives I'm going to put here. I will talk about why I'm not putting them there. Okay, so causatives I'm not putting there, but yes. There is one other thing which I could sort of kind of put here. It's not quite the same because it's an auxiliary, and that's the progressive. But I really don't want to put it in quite the same camp. So this is the raha form, okay? The raha form, I'm putting it separately because it does not directly combine with the root. So it's kha raha, and there are reasons to believe that kha and raha do not form one unit, right? So I can say, wo phal kha to raha hai, right? So kha and raha have not yet fused. Though, I mean, you could imagine that at some point they might, but at least right now.